How's life? How are things?
Things are good. Things are good. Kind of crazy. Just continually progressing, and not a lot of time at home. But that's how she goes.
That's the lifestyle you signed up for when you started making discs.
That's right. Yeah, it's true.
And which is a nice little segue into where we're going to go with this interview, because we're just going to talk about this new record, pretty much.
Cool. Good.
Well, where are you at with it now? I mean, it's still not out. You're playing shows. How are you feeling about the record so far?
It's funny, like when it was first done, I needed space from it, and I just had been in it for too long, too deep, and kind of needed time. So I took about 6 weeks, and I didn't hear hardly a lick of it in all that time. And then now, as things are moving on, that we're getting into the more logistical aspects of a record release as opposed to the heavy creative ones, and kind of coming back to it a little bit more and starting to actually enjoy it again, which is really nice, and getting a little bit more objective perspective on it, which is also kind of nice. And it's exciting. It's generally the response that we've had from the team is really great, and I think that it's a total departure from everything I've done previously, and it's a new direction, and it's something that we kind of had to go in head first and not worry about radio or not worry about whatever else, and just kind of get something done that felt really good.
Were you worried about radio on the last record? I don't see you as the kind of guy that worries about that kind of stuff too much.
No, and that was just it. We fluked out. We ended up being on the radio, but it was never something I thought about with the last record. And so there's all of a sudden there's this pressure. It's like there's all these radio stations that now have a relationship with your music, and they're expecting something that they can play. So there's this weird thing where you're like, well, now do I have to make something that's going to work out for that? And of course the answer is no. I mean, you just have to do what feels right, and we fluked out last time, and maybe we'll fluke out again, and if we don't, then then that's fine, and then it's just not a radio record, and that's going to be just okay.
Well, having said that, though, there are songs that will work on radio. I mean, I know the singles are going to be Row of Houses and Post-War Blues. I think, well, on certain stations, the ones that played off the first record probably will play these ones too.
Yeah. No, I think that they will. I think just in general the range that we're in, the kind of dynamic musical space that we exist in is not so crazy or so outside that all radio is concerned. But it's just a matter of I don't know. It's an interesting thing, dealing with radio, and I've had such a love relationship with it the last few years. There's been all these new radio stations across Canada that are playing music that I never would have expected on radio stations before. Maybe only on college radio, and so it's cool. It's amazing that it gets embraced that way, and I've seen how that can change a career. Like I've witnessed it firsthand, how being played on the radio can open up so many doors.
That's interesting you say that. I wanted to talk a lot about the record, but that's interesting because I'm starting to feel a trend the other way of radio not breaking bands as much anymore. But you're saying it's helped you.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think it's. It used to be a bit of a golden ticket, It used to be kind of like, well, if your song was on the radio, well then, man, you're going to be huge, because if you were on the radio, then it meant that you had all of the infrastructure that went along with being a band that got played on the radio. So, maybe you were on a major label, and maybe you had a huge marketing budget or something like that, and you had this giant team behind you. Whereas now, with these, kind of AAA stations happening in Canada, what you're getting is bands that have hardly toured out of their own city getting played on the radio, which is a totally different thing. So it's without having that crazy infrastructure alongside of it, it's a different kind of experience. But it has opened doors. It's unbelievable the things that radio did for me in Vancouver and across Canada, and even we can go down to some places in the States, cities that I'd never thought that we'd be touring, and there's these big crowds because they heard it on the station. So I don't know. It's a bizarre thing. I never used to listen to the radio, to be honest. I mean, for me, it was just about CBC. And now I'm finding we're driving through these towns, and you kind of breeze through the FM dial, and I'm kind of hearing some good music again. I think that the musical landscape that we exist in now is probably stronger than it's ever been. Not that all the best bands are existing now, and bands before now weren't as good. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I just think that there's more good music than ever before. I think that it used to be that we relied on a handful of bands to give us all the best music, and now you can pick and choose. I mean, God, there's thousands and thousands of amazing bands, and if they want to put it online and you want to hear it, you can find them in 30 seconds.
Yeah. Okay. So explain how you're releasing this record online that way then, because it's different now. You're right. People can find anything online whenever they want, really. Even I'm sure some of the new songs of yours are popping up on YouTube from live performances or those acoustic tunes that you did the other day.
Yeah.
How is this one being rolled out?
Yeah, the record is coming out September 27th, but it's done. It's sitting there. It feels weird to not do anything.
Yeah. How come it's just sitting there? How come it's not out for fans or something?
I think that it has to do with the kind of the scheduling of a record label and the scheduling of publicists and all those kinds of things. I mean, it's a world that I previously didn't really exist in.
And I wonder how it differs for you.
It's fine. It's awesome. Because the people that I work with have really been handpicked. I made a really important decision a long time ago that I never wanted to enter a business relationship with somebody who I would second guess about introducing to my family. Everyone that I work with I think that they have a really strong understanding of what I'm about, and they're good people. And every step along the way, it hasn't felt dirty. I think that's just that's the main thing. I think that there's this underlying thing that as soon as you have a team or as soon as you're working with a record label, then you're no longer grassroots and you're selling out or something. It's just it's not about being afraid of success. It's about being afraid of dirty success. And it's a very different thing. As long as you're kind of going about it with a really honest, sincere approach and the music doesn't suffer on behalf of it and everybody who's in your team gets you and represents you as such, it's great. It's amazing.
Yeah, and going with arts and crafts was probably, at least in my opinion, the best choice you could have done in Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way that came about was really organic and mind-blowing. I had respected that record label for so long, and I don't even think that I had sent them my record just because I assumed they wouldn't like it. And so when it all happened, it was crazy, and I feel kind of like they kind of hit the jackpot when it comes to Canadian record labels, just because they've had such a great legacy of amazing bands and really credible music and just a great aesthetic. There's something about the record label that just feels really good, and they're great. And when I started to get to know them as actual people, that's when I realized that it really was the right home, just because they get it. They're in it for the right reasons, and they're smart, and they've been a pleasure to work with.
You say you didn't send your music because it didn't fit with what they did. Well, this record fits more in terms of production, I suppose, with what Arts and Crafts does. Just leaning towards a more full band atmospheric, lots of soaring guitars and horns and textures and strings, and it feels bigger, this record, than the last one.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it is bigger. I think that is an appropriate term. It's a good adjective.
Thank you.
But it's also slightly less flashy in a way. There's something about it. It's not as shiny as the last record, but it's bigger and it's deeper and it's more complicated. And I think that I mean, what I hope is that it's the kind of record that lasts a long time. I think that, if you tap into a kind of sonic landscape sometimes in recording that is immediately gripping, that can build you a quick audience. But I don't know if that's the same kind of thing that sticks around in people's guts. It's one thing to be stuck in their heads, but it's another thing to get stuck in people's guts. And you want to get into their guts because that's what music, that's what my favorite music does to me. So that's exactly what we want to do to other people. I think that it's more chaotic and it's a little bit more spooky or something like that.
Well, you're talking about death a lot on it and burning a lot as well.
Yeah. I think, I spent a lot of time on trains and planes and a lot of time traveling on big pieces of metal going really quickly. And I have a vivid imagination. And, more than once I've pictured some kid throwing a cinder block in front of a train track or something like that. Oh. I don't know. I guess, I had a crazy couple of years. When the last record came out, we really did go from playing tiny little bars and coffee shops to getting these opportunities to play massive festivals and share stages with bands that we really adored. And everything was moving so quickly that, you kind of you start to imagine that it must end soon. Like things must go pear-shaped eventually. It's just too good. So I think, we spent a lot of time driving through wilderness and driving through desolate, isolated landscape, which got me thinking a lot about the woods and a lot about rural communities. There's a couple songs on the record that are kind of a departure for me in songwriting, because I used to write basically solely from my own perspective and who I was and what I thought about the world. And I think on this record there's a handful of songs where I'm putting myself in the shoes of some kind of non-existing fictional character that I've conjured in my brain. And a lot of that came out of imagining what it would be like to work at a gas station halfway between Sault Ste. Marie and Thunder Bay, And it's just long stretches of highway. It's like, people commute into Toronto and spend an hour and a half on the highway in the morning, an hour and a half on the highway on the way home, and that seems crazy to me. But what about driving like an hour to the gas station where you work and an hour home in the middle of nowhere, and basically sitting all day alone, as up for people come and go from your gas station? Or what about owning that gas station for 20 years and wanting to pass it off to your kids, but your kids don't want anything to do with it, so they move to Thunder Bay and they work at Denny's. Like, it's an interesting thing, like living way out there. It's a different existence than I've known for most of my life. I've mostly been a city guy, and so I don't know. These are things that toss around in my brain.
Yeah, would you ever want to do that? Would you ever want to live in the middle of nowhere, though?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it does. It's pretty charming. Like the idea of going and having a nice little garden and living in the middle of nowhere. I don't know. It seems all right.
Sounds like you're able to write pretty much anywhere. You can write in the van, write on the bus.
Yes, yeah, that's something I've been fortunately blessed with. I have kind of been able to do that. I mean, when I first started writing, I was basically just writing in my bedroom because I spent a lot of time at home. As things progressed and I was touring a lot, it was sort of fight or flight. Like either you learn how to write on the road or you don't. And I wasn't spending any time not on the road, so I had to learn how to write on the road. It's a different thing. I keep writing things down, and I put napkins in my pocket with phrases, and I accumulate them, and I write things into my phone, and I text message myself things. And I'm a really, really slow writer. Sometimes it takes me months to write one song. I'm writing slowly and subtly all the time, and that's what works for me. Everyone's got their own process, and that's what's worked for me, is just to keep an ongoing process, to just always be writing, and even when I'm not feeling incredibly creative, just to keep the door open for when I am feeling creative, to let it flow.
Are there any stream of consciousness songs then on this record? Have you ever written like that?
I think so. I mean, the last song on the record is called Jeopardy.
Mm-hmm.
And every lyric in the song is a question. It's like a big exercise in rhetorical prose. That is a stream of consciousness song. I mean, the first verse of that song is kind of about me and my own meanderings, and there's a line, why do I lean on good intentions?
Yeah, I like that line.
There's a lot of me in that first verse, and then the second verse is entirely different. It's much broader. It sort of goes from me to the greater world, and it starts asking questions about what is unity, and there's a line about what happens when all flags burn together. It's sort of like if one flag burns, then that's unfair because there's all these other flags and they're going to take advantage of that. But what if all the flags just burned at the same time? That would be a different thing. Like if we all started from zero, I'm sure we'd screw it all up again. But
you're probably right, unfortunately. Since we're talking about that song, though, that's the last song on the record. You got this very big band, like 1920s kind of horn section ending. Just a fantastic way to end the record.
Thank you. Yeah, that song, we could have gone a couple different directions, and I've been listening to a lot of Sam Cooke and feeling very inspired by that 1950s pop sound. And so everything was recorded on that song very similar to how it would have been recorded in the 50s. The drums are recorded in mono with ribbon mics, and we tried to go pretty authentic on it. And it ended up being this weird kind of combo of 50s, soul pop with a bit of Burt Bacharach in there or something. It's hard to really peg it down, but it is kind of a bigger band feel. And we just performed that song live for the very first time with our big 15-piece band in Vancouver on Sunday night in Stanley Park, and it was a lot of fun. We got to. There's not a lot of points in our set where we just have like a really long, drawn-out solo. And in this particular one, you know, you got the horn section cooking, and then you've got this great big solo between the guitar and the trumpet, and they're kind of battling almost. You know, it's great.
Is it the same band?
Pretty much, yeah. There's been some changes and there's been some additions, but you know, the core of the band has mostly been steady throughout the last couple of years. Yeah.
And same band that's on the record too.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Cool. And I remember, I can't remember what interview I was reading. I was reading you talking about something about this record being less about you and more about the band as a whole. So did they contribute to the writing process, or did you bring in all the songs pretty much finished?
Yeah, I mean, the lyrically and melodically, the songs were written, but in terms of the arrangements, it's very bandy. You know, there were times in the last couple of years, you know, we'd end up in Norman, Oklahoma, or something like that, and there's 9 people in the crowd. So I would just start playing a song that they had never heard, and they would just kind of play along, and they would figure it out. And we didn't have any time to rehearse because we were never at home. So we basically, like, a lot of these songs were like literally arranged on stage in front of people, which was a nice organic experience because it meant that there was kind of a sense of urgency to it, and it meant that, you know, there's a sense of improvisation to it. You know, more than anything, I think the record previous to that, I had performed those songs solo so many times. I'd been all over the world with my guitar. So by the time we got to the studio, those songs were already in my head. I figured them out. You know, I knew what I wanted to do. Whereas these, the last batch of songs, they weren't that solidified. They were, you know, they were still ideas. They were totally infinite with possibility. So came to the band and said, well, I got all these songs. Like, what do you guys want to do? And luckily, I've got a really great band, and I don't know how I keep holding on to them, but you know, they're so inspiring to play with. They all come from totally different directions from me. A lot of them are heavily entrenched in the kind of improvisational free jazz world, and it's hell scheduling our tours because these guys are getting offers to go play jazz festivals all over, you know, Norway and Prague, and so it's, you know, we're trying to keep everybody home now and then, and trying to keep everybody's career going. But the guys in my band have, you know, 4 or 5 bands apiece, and somehow we managed to keep it together.
Have you talked about this record before, or is this like this must be the first or close to it?
Yeah, you know, I haven't done that many interviews yet about this record.
Right.
It's funny, like throughout the process of a record release, you learn to talk about your record, and you try to formulate your thoughts in a coherent manner. But it is interesting. In talking about the record, you get to kind of know your record again a second time.
Yeah. Well, and it hasn't been that long since you recorded. I'm sure if I asked you these questions 3 years from now, there'd be very different answers than right now.
Certainly. Well, because songs are like children, and records are like photographs of your children. So your children grow up and they change, and every live show you play, the songs change and they grow up. And you know, the songs are infinite. They will continue to grow and evolve as you grow and evolve. But a record is finite. It is finished. It is done. It is a photograph of your child, and it's never going to change. So you can look back at that photograph. You can listen to the album and know that's where the song was then. And then you can play the song now, or you can look at your grown-up kid now and, you know, see, okay, well, that's what they are now. So, you know, your opinions of your kids change as you grow up too, I imagine. I don't have any kids, but, you know, your opinions of your songs, your opinions of your work change and develop.
What song is undertaking the most change then?
Well, it's interesting. I like, you know, the second song on the record, How Darwinian. It's one of my favorites. And I think it's entirely different than any song that I've recorded before. It's kind of moody and Radioheady. It's, you know, it's funny. Like, there's this really interesting thing going on in Kenton's drumming on this record, because on one hand, the drums are really subtle on a number of songs. They're not, you know, crazy high in the mix. It doesn't sound like rock drumming, but it doesn't sound like jazz drumming, and it doesn't really. It's like there's this really subtle nature, understated kind of nature to his playing on this record. But at the same time, there's like incredible kicking, rhythmic, forward propulsion on the record too. It's a sad record. It's all about death and isolation, but it moves. Like I'm proud to say that it's not like a sorrowful, sad sounding record all the time. Like, it's got some real rhythm to it, and it kicks. So that's really cool for me to sit back and just appreciate other people's performances. I mean, it's, you know, my favorite parts of the record are the parts where I'm just enjoying the other things that aren't me, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, then what do you love about harmonics? I noticed a lot of harmonics on your records.
Harmonics, like
on the 12th fret or the 7th fret of guitar.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't really thought of that.
They're all over. Well, do you know what I mean though? They're all over the place.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? That's not me. It's there's maybe a couple that are me. I think it's
No, but you would still have final say, wouldn't you? Being like, nah, you know what? I don't
yeah,
like that, or keep doing that. That sounds good. That kind of stuff.
yeah, right. I mean, I guess like that's all Gord Gardena. I don't know. I give Gord a seriously long leash. I basically to the whole band, I say just do whatever you want, and if I don't like it, I'll tell you. So I give them a really long leash to be playful, and generally what I find is that whatever they do, I like it. So I don't really have to, direct them all that much. And it's true actually. And it's now that I think about it, post-war blues has a lot of harmonics on it.
That's where I was going to go next. Yeah.
Kind of like a really muted, quick, fast, harmonic-sounding electric guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's interesting. I think that I like things that aren't perfectly predictable or beautiful. Society, humans, people, we're all flawed, and that's what makes us great. Our flaws, our collection of flaws is sort of like what is our defining characteristics of our personality. So there's a lot of flubs. There's a lot of like flubbed guitar notes on this record. And
you got
there's
to
a lot
keep
of
those
like
in. That's good.
weird note choices on this record in terms of the guitar that a lot of people would just delete and redo and try and get a better, cleaner, more fluid sounding take or something. But for me, I feel like a lot of those flub notes, that's what happened. That was that moment, like that was the moment of that recording. And that was the kind of honest portrayal of what was happening in his guitar at that moment. And I don't know, I just don't want to mess with that, like I want to let that breathe and live. And then, of course, coming back to it, those are my favorite parts.
One of my favorite parts of the record is starting a war to unite the kids.
Oh yeah.
Because I think I know your thoughts on war just from Facebook posts and whatnot. How hard is it to write a song where I would think you want to kind of protest the idea of war, yet you also want to stay respectful to the troops.
Yeah.
And riding that thin line.
And that song is like, I would say, I almost want to say it's like, it's not even an anti-war song so much, it's just like an anti-manipulation song. It's about controlling people, and it just frustrates me that the same governments that want to send poor kids off to war are the same governments that cut veterans' rights and don't want to take care of those kids when they come home, and they're still poor, but now they're all messed up in the head, like, this just seems evil. I'd been listening to some radio programs on PTSD and did some reading on post-traumatic stress disorder, and just shell shock. It's a heavy thing, and it's almost not really respected. It's like, if somebody's foot gets cut off, well, man, that's terrible. We gotta understand that. But if they're psychologically damaged the rest of their life, it's not the same. It's not as heavy. The song is a bit of a protest against just unethical and unresponsible governance, more so than just plain anti-war. I understand that there are times that war are necessary, but in this day and age, I find it hard to believe that most of the ones that happen are necessary and could have been dealt with in different ways. I don't know.
I'd love to delve into that with you sometime, but I know we don't have too much time, so let's keep going through some songs, as fun as that would be. If I Am Dead, back to the burning, back to the death, back to the leaves themes, a little acoustic ballad. I guess there's two slow songs on the record. There's that and Daffodil that come after one another.
It's like a living will.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like, images of death and what do I want to happen when I die? And that song too, it touches on, it starts off saying, those dying breeds gather beneath fallen trees, beds of leaves. Yeah, it's, the chorus, if only we'd known, sort of like, what are we doing? What are we doing to each other? What are we doing to the world? And, we're always so full of hindsight, but so damaged to repeat all of our mistakes and carry out in the present all the things that we damn in the past. And I think that it happens on a societal level and also happens on a personal level. We all do it. Sort of, if only I had known. Sort of like, well, if only I'd known I was going to die, well, I would have lived differently. But of course, I always knew I was going to die. So why didn't I live differently?
Daffodil, slowest song on the record. You mentioned a whole bunch of flowers. Just a cute little love song.
Yeah, makes me think of my grandfather. It's the kind of song you would have liked. It sounds like it was written in the 20s or 30s. And
yeah, it
sounds
totally
like a
does.
Traditional song that I ripped off. I actually did write it.
Just clearing the air, are you? Just making sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's it's funny. It's one of those things where I wrote it and I was like, no, that song's too pretty. It's too pretty. It's too much of a love song. So let's make it filthy. So we just tried to add as many layers of chaotic noise to it as possible and dirty it up a little bit. And, run every instrument through a couple layers of distortion and overdrive.
You talk about adding noise, and the big crescendo on the next song starts with them, ends with us.
Yeah.
And probably the biggest crescendo on the record, brings a tempo back in the record about halfway through. Lyrically, it reminds me of Lost, the TV show.
Yeah. Well, it was inspired by a trip to Guatemala I did when I was about 18 and 17 maybe. In the break between grade 11 and 12, I was growing up on the west side of Vancouver, and I think my mom sensed that I was getting a little bit too preoccupied with name brand clothing and things like that. And she sent me down on this trip to Guatemala with a dozen other people, and basically it was a trip going around to human rights organizations, and we went to all the slums, and we met with people who were involved with the kind of gruesome outcome of the the civil war in Guatemala that had sort of ended the year before but sort of hadn't ended. And it was kind of a dangerous time there. It was kind of interesting, but it was a beautiful, amazing trip, and I came home so grateful for all the things that I had. And I think that you have to leave to know what you have, right? You have to. That's why I get so scared of people who do not travel, because they don't understand that their way of life is not the infrastructure or the basis or the norm. Their way of life is only one of millions of norms, and so that it really taught me a lesson. I came home, I was a very different person after that. I kind of had a new level of appreciation for the bubble world that I was living in. So that song's kind of about the Civil War in Guatemala, but it's any Civil War. The song was originally called Guatemala, and then we changed it. Just because I didn't want it to just be about Guatemala. I wanted it to be about that feeling where living in a society where you can't tell your opinions to anyone in case, and it's this thing about them and us. Either you're with us or you're against us. Scariest words Bush ever said, it's terrible. It's black and white. Everything's black and white. There's no gray, And this whole thing about being afraid to live your life in the country where you're from is crazy. Being afraid in the night someone's going to come and throw you out of a helicopter or something.
Yeah, we got lucky growing up here, hey?
Certainly did.
Oh, Fortune. Huge drums. The first one almost scares you because you don't expect it.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning. I love there's a quick little fill to it at some point.
Yeah.
The last record obviously titled after a node to Kurt Vonnegut. Anything from Oh Fortune, or was it just you had the song and let's title the record?
No, I mean, I am aware that there is an opera called Oh Fortuna, but it wasn't really where it was coming from. It's just back to the isolation, back to the Thunder Bay thing, way up in northern Ontario or something, and the line "nice to have the kids around." It's talking about being dead and being at a funeral and being at your own funeral and kind of saying, don't be sad, just be happy. And the idea that if an old parent dies and their kids have all moved away and living in different places, it's their death that brings all the kids home. And even though it's sad that there's a death, there's like this happy thing because, well, at least it brought everyone together one more time.
Why are you writing? We're the same age. Why are you writing about death so much? Do you feel it? Like I'm not even thinking about it too much yet.
I don't know. Got time. I didn't get it out of me.
Okay, fair enough.
It's like whatever's going on in my brain or in my heart is going to come out, and I have to get through it. I have to work through it, and then I can move beyond it and do something different. But,
on the topic of death songs, there's a song called Regarding Death and Dying. There's this gospel hymns thing going on. It's going to sound great when you're doing your theater tours. And
thanks.
And there's like a storm brewing of noise underneath.
Yeah, and that was another one. There's like this. It's kind of like this nice little folk ditty, this like little old traditional sounding folk song, and so I was like, no, it's too pretty. I want to mess it up. So we just had got Kenton to lay down a few layers of chaos and blend them all together and make some noise. The song itself has no regard for all the noise that's going on beneath it. It's like two separate entities and kind of coinciding.
Rows of Houses. I hear you're inspired by films and books when you write sometimes.
Stand By Me. That song's about Stand By Me. It's kind of written from the perspective of Gordon LeChance.
The book or the movie?
Well, you know what? Actually, this is a confession. This is terrible. I've actually never read The Body.
Oh, okay.
So I really should.
It's a short. Yeah, it's like 20 pages.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, you should get on that.
Probably worth picking up.
Anyway, so Stand By Me.
Yeah, and I love that movie. It's great, and it really says a lot about growing up and loss of innocence and what that means. Yeah, it's heavy. It's good.
And since we started with the last song on the disc, let's end with the first song on the disc. It's about as helpful as you can be without being any help at all. I love how the record ends with that huge big band crescendo. This almost sounds like the intro of Sergeant Pepper with the band, with the string band, tuning up and getting ready to go.
Yeah.
Was that on purpose,
Yeah,
or was that?
It was that song. That song was in my brain for years. And when we recorded it, we had the guy named Avon Kang out of Seattle do all the arrangements for it. And knocked it out of the park. It sounds like an introduction. The song does,
Mm-hmm.
Kind of starts off with a big bang, and it's huge and it's grandiose and it's over the top, and it's kind of exactly what I loved about it. But yeah, there's a book called The Luck of Ginger Coffee about this guy from Ireland living in the United States, and he's got a family and he can't really get a job together, and thinking about just never really doing all the things you want to do because you're so preoccupied about just getting the basic necessities handled, feeling out of touch with the world and out of touch with luck, and kind of not letting it get you down, and kind of, rather than the classic Neil Young, better to burn out than to fade away, it's like, rather than letting the world get you down, saying, well, you're not going to burn me, I'm going to burn myself, I'm going to light myself on fire.
Which seems to be a theme of the record too.
Yeah, death and fire. There you go.
And before I let you go, we did this last time, but 5 quick questions, one-word answers.
Okay.
Road or studio?
Rudio.
Lennon or McCartney?
Lennon.
Lyrics, melody, or rhythm? What's most important in a song?
Lyrics.
Song you've written you're most proud of?
Oof.
Actually, you know what? Better question. Now that you have this new disc coming out, which of the new songs sounds best live?
Roads of Houses.
Cool. And in one word, Oh Fortune.
Departure.